This is the first of two tutorials on routing your tracks. That's routing, R-O-U-T-I-N-G. And when you route your tracks, you use outputs and sends. There's another word, S-E-N-D-S, the plural of send. We're going to talk about outputs in this tutorial, and we'll talk about sends in the next tutorial. To follow along, go get the 1206 routing outputs multi-track session inside the working files folder, multi-track session subfolder right there. That brings in this multi-track session. Let's take a look at it. A whole bunch of clips and a whole bunch of tracks, followed by a bunch of bus tracks. I've shown you how to make bus tracks before. I'm going to show you a new way to make bus tracks now. And then followed by the master track, which is always the last track. When you create a default multi-track session, when you select none from the new multi-track session dialog box, you create a multi-track session with 6 tracks and the master track. And all those 6 tracks are output to the master track. And you look over here in the header, when you've got the inputs outputs button clicked on, you see the inputs and outputs here in the header. The input is the arrow going to the right and the output is to the left. The input is what comes into the track, and you typically don't worry about that unless you're going to record to that track or you're going to listen to an instrument or some other kind of input on that track. What we're talking about here is the output. That's this track here. And if you don't see the output, make sure you can drag this header down a little bit so you can see the output. And this one goes to the master track by default. Well, what I want to do is I want to send it to the master track, but I want to give it a detour on the way there. And I use a bus to do that. And I can detour it off the entire piece of software if I want to, but most times I just give it a little detour, send it to a bus, and then have that bus continue on to the master track. Let me just show you what I mean in a graphic. Here's a typical setup. We've got 3 different tracks here, probably 3 mics on these 3 sets of drums. This graphic came from the help file for Audition CS5.5, and I imagine it'll look similar to this in the CS6 version of the help file. I've kind of adjusted it a little bit for this tutorial. So these 3 tracks come into a bus. The outputs are not to the master track. The outputs go to a bus. And why would you do that? Well, let's say you've got these 3 different tracks and you want to apply the same effect to each of the 3 tracks. Well, it'd be very inefficient to apply the same effect to 3 different tracks. It's much more efficient to apply one effect to the bus and have all 3 go into that bus. It also saves on resources in your system, so it makes Audition work a little bit better. Plus, you may want to control the volume for the whole set. So you can set up volume individually for these guys to make a nice mix of the 3 different tracks. But then once you create that nice mix of the 3 tracks, you can route them all to this bus and control their overall volume. Here, let's say a soloist comes in, you can bring the percussion down, for example. You can also place them on the stage here. You can pan them. You can pan these instruments individually in their tracks. So let's say you pan this guy a little bit left of center, this one center, this one to the right of center, which is probably what you might want to do. But down here in the bus, you can take the whole kit and caboodle of them, the whole mass, and slide the whole group left and right on the stage, keeping them all in their relative original spacing. So routing your output to a bus helps make your work become more efficient. You don't have to have the bus go directly to the master track. You can have a bus here for these 3 instruments and a bus here for these 2 tracks. This bus might have one effect on it. This bus might have a different effect. Then you can route those 2 buses to another bus, and this bus might have yet another effect that affects all 5 tracks, plus you can control the overall volume for all 5 and the panning here, and then you can then route it on down to the master track. So there are multiple ways to route tracks and then go on to route bus tracks. So back here, let's see what we've got. We've got 2 tracks here routed to a bus. You got the organ left and organ right, and I've got them panned a little bit to the right. I've got this one right over 30 and this one right 50. So if this were the center of the stage here, one's about here, the right 30, and then right 50 is over here. So they're a group of 2 instruments right there. And I've also got their volume level set here and all that kind of stuff, but I've not applied any effects here. I want to apply one effect to both of them at once, and I do that in a bus. And so I have them routed to the organ bus. And I did that by opening up this, going to bus, and selecting the organ bus, which I had made previously. Let me just scroll down here. Here is the organ bus on top, and I have one effect applied to this bus. I can go over to the effects button here and see that I've got studio reverb on this bus. So if I want to hear these 2 organ tracks in isolation, I can click on this solo button and play. And there they are in isolation. I can decide whether I want to adjust the reverb by opening up the reverb on this and playing them again. I can change these things as I listen to it if I want to. If I want to want to change the room size, I can increase it like so. And when I'm satisfied, I can close this, and I applied one effect to 2 tracks by doing this. And if I want to control the volume, I can control the overall volume here. And if I want to control the volume over time using a volume envelope for the entire track, bus tracks have volume envelopes as well. There they are. I also have panning envelopes. If I want to add a panning envelope to the bus track, I can also pan this entire group and change the panning over time if I want to. If I don't want to pan it over time, I can simply adjust the location here. I've already panned them a little bit to the right, but if I want to change that location, I can pan them far to the left, wherever I want to do it. I've already kind of created them to the right, but I can move them farther to the right even. One of the advantages of having a bus, you can use them or move them as a unit. Well, let me show you the workflow when you start from scratch with some files. I'll de-solo that to make everybody else active again. I've added 4 tracks here, 4 clips in a horn section, tenor sax left, tenor sax right, horns left, horns right. The horns are synthesized horns, but let's hear how they sound in the mix. Something like that. So we're going to send them all to a bus, and here's the process. I need to go back to the inputs and outputs. When I said send to the bus, I should really say we're going to route them to a bus. I don't want to confuse sending with sends. So I'll route them to a bus. I need to see the output. I can't quite see it, so I'll drag this down so I can see the output for at least the first 3 anyways. There we go. Click this disclosure triangle to the right for the output and say, okay, I want bus. And I don't have my horn section bus yet. I'm just going to click add bus, which is an easy way to add a bus this way rather than right-clicking in a track. There we go, and it puts it right here. I'm going to click on the word bus A and type in horn section. There you go. And now by doing this, I've already now routed this track to the horn section. I'm going to do that for the remaining 3 here. I'll route this one to the horn section by clicking this little output there. Bus, horn section, this guy bus, horn section, and this one I can't quite see it, so I drag it down so I can see the output. Bus, horn section. Now that I've got all 4 of those guys routed to the bus section, I probably want to put an effect on the horn section so that I can add an effect that I can control for all 4 at once. So just to keep things simple, I click on this effects button here. Let's add a reverb to it, which is kind of an easy thing to add. I'll add the studio reverb. We'll go with the default here, vocal reverb medium. I'll just accept that for now. And now I can control the reverb for this section. I'll solo those 4 tracks by clicking on the solo for the horn section. You'll notice that only those 4 tracks now are soloed. If I want to change the reverb, I could open it up and change it for those 4 tracks all at once. And I could also control their volume here. So for instance, when they come in, I might raise the volume. When they go out, I'll bring them down a little bit. I really don't want this horn section right there, the horn section bus. I really rather have it down with the rest of the buses just for, the purposes of this exercise. So I'll zoom out a little bit here. I got the horn section there. I'm going to drag it down. All these tracks, all the headers have grabber bars there, and I can grab this guy and drag it down right above the organ. That's how that works. So that's how you add the bus via that output menu inside each track header. Let me show you one more thing now. I'll expand the view a little bit by zooming in like that. Now let's say I want to have the horn section and the organ bus go to another bus on the way to the master track. Right now, when I click on the input-output, you see they both go to the master track. Let's say I want to have them go to a separate bus that I want to apply an effect to that bus, like a compressor, for example. So I click this little output there, go to bus. I want to add a bus. We'll call this one the compressor bus. I'll click on it, compressor. And I'm going to route these 2 guys to the compressor, that one there, and I'll route the organ to the compressor as well. And then we can then apply an effect to the compressor. I'll just go to effects, with this one, and let's go to amplitude and compression and do the multi-band compressor for that one. And if I want to, adjust the compressor, I have these guys now routed not directly to the master track anymore. I have them directed to the compressor, and then the compressor goes to the master track. So I'm going to solo the compressor, and that'll have the horn section soloed and the organ soloed. Notice how these guys are now active. I can hear them all at once now. Let me go back a little bit so you can hear the horn section with the organ. Let me just pull it back slightly like that. Something like that. So you can put them all together inside one bus like this and then have that bus routed to the master track. So what I hope you take away from this is that routing your outputs to buses can make your work more efficient and more effective. But you might also think it makes it awfully complicated. Well, gird yourself for the next tutorial because outputs are relatively straightforward. Sends can get really complicated.